The room did not feel like a place where something sacred was about to begin. It felt like a place where something had already ended. Lena Carter stood at the center of it, unmoving, untouched, and entirely aware that nothing about this moment belonged to her. The dress she wore was not chosen with care. It was selected with intention. White, not for purity, but for contrast, for symbolism, for the kind of quiet statement that did not need explanation. A woman dressed as a bride, standing in front of the man who killed her brother, and surrounded by people who called it peace. Her name had once meant something else. Before the silence, before the closed doors, before the way her family stopped saying her brother's name like it had never existed at all. Lena had learned quickly that grief was not always loud. Sometimes it was controlled, contained, rewritten. Her brother's death had not been mourned. It had been processed, filed, justified. A clean conclusion written over something that had not felt clean at all. Officially, it had been called necessary, an act of order, a decision made to preserve balance. But Lena had seen the body, and there had been nothing balanced about it. The first time she heard the name Adrian Cross, it had not come with anger. It had come with certainty, the kind of certainty that erased questions before they could form. He did what had to be done. That was all anyone said. No one explained why. No one clarified how. No one allowed space for doubt, because in their world, power did not justify itself. It declared truth, and everyone else accepted it. Lena did not. She had stood in the silence after her brother's death, listening to the way the narrative formed around it, watching how easily people replaced grief with logic. But logic did not explain the look in her brother's eyes before he died, and it did not explain why no one seemed willing to speak about it, without rehearsing their words first. That was where the fracture began, not in the death, in the explanation. And now, that fracture had led her here. The ceremony was already in motion when she stepped forward. Not grand, not emotional, structured. Everything about it felt predetermined, as if every movement had been decided long before she ever agreed to stand there, because she had never really agreed. Not fully, not freely. This was not a choice. It was a continuation of decisions made above her, around her, without her. Adrian Cross stood at the far end of the room, exactly where he was supposed to be, not elevated, not hidden, placed, like everything else in this moment. Lena did not look at him immediately. She didn't need to. His presence was already there, filling the space without movement, commanding attention without demanding it. And that was what made him dangerous. She had imagined this moment differently, not softer, not kinder, but clearer. She had expected rage, hatred, something she could hold on to, something that justified the way her chest tightened every time she thought about him. But standing here, there was no clarity, only silence, and silence was harder to fight. The hook formed in her mind, sharp and unrelenting. Hatred is easy when you're given a reason, but what do you do when no one lets you see the truth? Lena's fingers curled slightly at her side, hidden within the fold of the dress, her breathing steady despite the pressure pressing in from all directions. This was not just a wedding. It was a statement, a transaction, a reinforcement of power disguised as unity. Two families aligning, two forces stabilizing. And she was a bridge. The humiliation was not loud. No one insulted her. No one degraded her openly. That would have been easier. This was quieter, more refined. The way people avoided her eyes. The way they acknowledged her presence without recognizing her. The way her existence had been reduced to function. That was where the humiliation lived. Not in what was done to her. In what she had become. A symbol. Lena stepped forward when expected, her movements precise, controlled, her expression unreadable, because if she showed anything at all, it would be used, interpreted, defined, and she refused to let them define this moment for her. Adrian remained still, unshaken, unchanged. The man who had ended her brother's life now stood waiting to become her husband, and no one questioned it. That was the part she could not accept, not the marriage. The silence around it. Her gaze lifted slowly, not all at once, not dramatically, carefully, like she was choosing the exact moment to see him. And when she did, everything narrowed. Adrian Cross did not look like a man who needed to defend himself. He did not carry guilt. He did not carry justification. He carried certainty, the kind that did not ask for forgiveness, because it did not believe it needed it. That should have made it easier to hate him, to reduce him to something simple, something she could define as the enemy. But it didn't, because there was no reaction, no acknowledgement of what he had done, no sign that this moment carried any weight for him beyond its function. That was what unsettled her. Not cruelty, not arrogance, control. Lena searched his expression for something, anything, that could anchor her anger. But there was nothing, no hesitation, no discomfort, no visible trace of the past she carried so heavily. The ceremony continued around them, words spoken, movements executed, everything unfolding exactly as it was meant to. But Lena did not hear it, did not register it, because her focus had narrowed completely. On him. This was the man who killed her brother. This was the man everyone defended. This was the man she had been forced to stand beside. And yet, he did not look like a monster. That thought hit harder than anything else, because monsters were easier to hate, easier to destroy. But men like this, men who stood in silence, untouched by accusation, they were harder, because they made you question everything. Lena's chest tightened, her thoughts shifting rapidly as something unfamiliar moved beneath her anger. Not forgiveness, not understanding. Something else, something dangerous. Doubt. The moment stretched, time slowing just enough to make everything feel deliberate, intentional, unavoidable. And then, it happened. Adrian looked at her. Not briefly, not casually, directly. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something changed. Not in the room, not in the ceremony, in the space between them. Because his gaze was not empty, not detached, not indifferent. It was aware, not of her presence, of her intent. Lena felt it immediately, the way his attention sharpened, the way the silence between them shifted into something heavier, more focused. He knew, not what she would do, but what she wanted. The realization hit with quiet force, because there was no hesitation in his expression, no confusion, no misinterpretation, only recognition, as if the thought forming in her mind, the anger she had buried so carefully, the hatred she had refused to show. He had already seen it, and not just seen it, expected it. Lena's breath stilled, her body remaining perfectly composed despite the shift happening beneath the surface. Because this changed everything. She was not standing beside a man who was unaware of her. She was standing beside a man who understood her, without a single word being spoken. And that was far more dangerous than anything she had prepared for. The ceremony ended, not dramatically, not memorably, just complete. But the moment remained, suspended, unresolved. Because as Lena stood there, bound to a man she had every reason to destroy, she understood something that altered the entire foundation of what came next. Adrian Cross was not ignoring her hatred. He was watching it, and waiting to see what she would do with it. The moment the ceremony ended, nothing changed. And that was the first thing Lena Carter noticed. No shift in tone, no tightening of control, no quiet assertion of ownership that would have confirmed everything she believed about Adrian Cross. Instead, the world around him continued exactly as it had before, structured, controlled, unshaken, as if marrying her had not altered anything at all. That should have made it easier. It didn't, because Lena had prepared for something else entirely. She had expected retaliation disguised as authority, control masked as protection, punishment framed as necessity. That was how men like him operated. That was what power looked like. But Adrian Cross, he did none of it. The estate she was brought into did not feel like a place meant to trap her. It felt like a place that had no need to. Every corridor, every movement, every silent exchange between the people inside it carried the same message. Nothing here resisted, because nothing needed to. Adrian's empire was not built on visible force. It was built on certainty. And certainty did not need to prove itself. Lena moved through it carefully, her awareness sharp, her posture controlled, her silence intentional. Because she understood something clearly now. This was not a place where survival came from resistance. It came from understanding the structure, and the structure was him. Adrian Cross did not follow her, did not assign guards to shadow her movements, did not restrict her access in ways that felt obvious. That alone disrupted everything she had prepared for. The hook formed in her mind, cold and precise. It is easier to hate a man who cages you than one who lets you walk freely and makes you question why. Lena had expected to feel trapped. Instead, she felt observed. Not constantly, not aggressively, but consistently, like her presence had been accounted for in every space she entered, like the system adjusted around her, without needing to acknowledge her directly, and at the center of that system was Adrian. His reputation had been built on something undeniable, ruthless, calculated, emotionally unreachable, a man who did not hesitate, a man who did not explain, a man who did not forgive. Everything she had heard aligned with what she saw, except for one thing. He did not treat her like a threat. That was the inconsistency. That was the fracture, because by every logical measure, she was the sister of the man he killed, the daughter of a family now bound to him through force alliance, a variable place inside his world with reason to resist, to disrupt, to destroy. And yet, he did not move against her. Lena watched him carefully, not openly, never directly, but with the kind of quiet attention that turned observation into strategy. She studied his patterns, his timing, the way he interacted with others. Adrian did not dominate space. He controlled it. There was a difference. Dominance demanded attention. Control redirected it. People responded to him without hesitation, not out of fear alone, out of certainty. They trusted his decisions, followed his structure, moved within his system like it was something they chose, not something forced upon them. That was what unsettled her, because men like him were not supposed to inspire loyalty. They were supposed to demand obedience. And obedience broke, eventually. But this held. Lena began searching for cracks. Small ones, invisible ones. Anything that could confirm what she already believed, that he was a monster, that what he had done to her brother had not just been justified, but intentional, cruel, necessary in the worst possible way. But every time she looked, she found nothing. Not kindness, not softness, not anything that would excuse him, but also not cruelty. There were no unnecessary punishments, no excessive displays of power, no moments where he used his position to break someone simply because he could. That absence, it began to matter, more than anything else. Lena found herself waiting for it, for the moment where the mask slipped, where the truth revealed itself in a way she could not deny. But it never came. Instead, there was distance. Adrian maintained it deliberately, never too close, never too far. He did not impose himself on her, did not force interaction, did not attempt to control her through proximity. That alone changed the dynamic, because she had nothing to push against. Hatred needed resistance, needed something to react to build against, to define itself through. But here, there was nothing. Lena stood alone one evening, her reflection fading the glass as she tried to reconstruct the image she had built of him. The man who killed her brother, the man she had been forced to marry, the man she was supposed to hate without hesitation. And yet, that image no longer aligned perfectly with reality. The confusion settled slowly, then completely, because she realized something she had not expected. She did not understand him. And that was the most dangerous position she could be in. Her thoughts sharpened, turning inward, analyzing every interaction, every moment, every absence of action that should have existed. If he was not controlling her, why? If he was not punishing her, why? If he was not forcing her into submission, why? There were only two possibilities. Either he did not see her as a threat, or he knew something she didn't. The second thought stayed, lingering, expanding, because Adrian Cross did not overlook threats. He eliminated them, which meant, if he wasn't acting, there was a reason, and that reason was hidden. Lena became more careful after that, not less, because confusion was more dangerous than fear. Fear gave direction. Confusion created mistakes. She adjusted her movements, her presence, her attention, watching not just him, but everything around him. And slowly, subtly, she began to notice something else. Adrian was aware of her observation, not reacting, not confronting, but aware. The way his gaze would shift just slightly when she entered a space. The way his attention aligned with her movements without following them directly. The way nothing she did went entirely unnoticed, even when it appeared that it did. That realization settled into something sharper, because it meant he was watching her too, not as a prisoner, not as a threat, as something else, something he had not yet decided how to define. The tension between them grew in silence, not through confrontation, not through conflict, but through presence. Two people moving within the same space, both aware, neither speaking, both holding something back. And the longer it continued, the more it shifted. Lena felt it in the way her thoughts changed, not forgiving, not softening, but questioning, because hatred without confirmation began to feel unstable, and instability was not something she could afford. The hook returned, heavier this time. When the man you hate refuses to prove you right, the only thing left to question is yourself. That thought unsettled her more than anything else, because it shifted the conflict from him to her. Lena stood in the quiet of his world, surrounded by a structure she did not fully understand, watching a man she could not fully define. And for the first time, her certainty began to fracture, because Adrian Cross did not defend himself, did not explain, did not justify. And that silence, that deliberate refusal to speak about what mattered most, it felt more dangerous than guilt ever could. Silence became their language, not chosen, not agreed upon, but inevitable. Lena Carter did not confront Adrian Cross after the wedding, and he did not approach her. There were no arguments, no accusations, no forced conversations that tried to define what they were supposed to be, because neither of them needed to pretend. This was not a marriage. It was an arrangement built on something neither of them acknowledged, and neither of them denied. They existed within the same space like two forces that refused collide, close enough to feel, far enough to avoid. And in that distance, something began to form, not connection, not understanding, something far more complicated. Awareness. Days passed without conflict. That was the problem. Lena had expected resistance, expected moments where she could push back, provoke, react, expected something she could fight. But there was nothing. Adrian did not impose himself on her, did not attempt to control her behavior, did not restrict her in ways that would confirm her position as something owned. Instead, he maintained distance, precise, consistent, deliberate. That distance did not feel like indifference. It felt like choice. And that unsettled her. The hook settled into her thoughts, sharp and persistent. It is easier to hate someone who hurts you than someone who refuses to touch you at all. Lena began testing it, not openly, not recklessly, subtly, a delayed response when she knew it would be noticed, a shift in routine that disrupted the pattern he had established, a presence in spaces she was not expected to be. Each time, she waited for reaction, for correction, for something that confirmed his control. And each time, nothing happened. No punishment, no confrontation, no visible acknowledgement. Only the same controlled distance. That was when she understood something she hadn't before. He was not ignoring her actions. He was choosing not to respond to them. And that was far more intentional. Lena adjusted her approach, not stopping, refining, because if he would not react to disruption, Then she would observe his response to everything else. She began watching him with others, not directly, never directly, but closely enough to see what most people missed. Adrian did not lead through fear, not entirely. Fear existed, but it was not the foundation. Loyalty was. Men followed him without hesitation, not because they were forced, because they trusted him. That was what unsettled her, because trust was not something built through violence alone. It required something else. Consistency, protection, reliability. And Adrian Cross, he provided all of it. She saw it in the way he handled conflict, not loudly, not emotionally, efficiently, without unnecessary damage, without excess. She saw it in the way people looked at him, not just with fear, with certainty. And slowly, something inside her began to shift. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, doubt. Because the man she had built in her mind, the man responsible for her brother's death, did not align completely with the man she was watching. And that misalignment, it grew. Fragments of his past surfaced in quiet ways, not through direct explanation, through observation, through implication. A name spoken once and never repeated. A reaction that lasted only a second but carried weight. A decision that revealed history without explaining it. Betrayal, loss, responsibility. They were not spoken, but they were present. And Lena, she saw them. The realization settled slowly, then completely, because it forced her to confront something she had not allowed herself to consider. Adrian Cross had not become what he was without reason. That did not excuse what he had done, did not justify it, but it complicated it. And complication was dangerous, because it made hatred harder to maintain. Lena stood alone one evening, her thoughts sharper than they had been since she arrived, because something had changed, not in him, in her. The anger was still there, strong, present, unresolved, but it was no longer clear. The edges had blurred, the certainty had fractured, and that was the part she could not accept, because revenge required clarity, required certainty, required a defined enemy. And Adrian Cross, he was no longer defined. The symbolism settled heavily in her mind. Hatred was supposed to be sharp, focused, unquestioned, but now it felt unstable, like something she could no longer hold on to without effort. The hook returned, heavier this time. Hatred loses its power the moment it has to explain itself. That thought unsettled her more than anything else, because it shifted the foundation of everything she had built her survival on. If she could not hate him clearly, then what was she supposed to do with him? Lena's breathing slowed, her thoughts tightening into something more controlled, because she understood the danger now. Not him, herself. She was adapting, not just to his world, to him. And that was where everything became complicated. Her focus shifted again, not outward, inward. She began analyzing her own reactions, her own hesitation, the way her instincts no longer aligned perfectly with her intention. Because there were moments, small, almost invisible, where she did not want to act against him. Not because she trusted him, not because she believed him, because she did not understand him. And acting without understanding, that was risk. The war inside her sharpened, not between survival and revenge, between clarity and doubt. And doubt weakened action. Lena moved through the space carefully, her posture unchanged, her expression controlled. But inside, everything was shifting. She was no longer just surviving beside him. She was adjusting to him. And that was something she had never planned for. The moment came quietly, not dramatic, not defined. She stood across from him in a space that held no witnesses, no pressure, no expectation, just presence. Adrian looked at her the same way he always did, steady, controlled, unreadable, and for the first time, Lena did not feel the immediate urge to resist it. That realization hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't forced, it wasn't manipulated, it was natural. And that terrified her. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, her breathing steady but her thoughts anything but. Because this was the moment everything changed. Not because of what he did, because of what she didn't. She did not push back, did not provoke, did not react. She hesitated. And hesitation was something she had not allowed herself since the moment her brother died. The realization settled in fully, heavy, unavoidable. For the first time, she was not certain she wanted to destroy him. And that was the most dangerous thought she had ever had. Because hesitation did not just weaken action. It changed it. As Lena stood there, her silence no longer defined by resistance, but by something far more uncertain. She understood something that terrified her more than anything Adrian Cross could ever do. She was beginning to lose her ability to hate him, and that hesitation might destroy her before he ever could. Hesitation did not weaken Lena Carter. It redirected her. Because once hatred lost its clarity, something else took its place. Questions. And questions, unlike anger, did not settle. They expanded. They pushed. They demanded answers that could no longer be ignored. Lena stopped trying to feel. She started trying to understand. The shift was quiet, invisible to anyone watching. But internally, everything changed. Because if she could no longer trust her anger, then she would rely on something else. Evidence. Her brother's death had always been presented as final, clean, explained in a way that left no room for doubt. But now she saw the cracks. It started with absence, not what was there, what wasn't. The official reports were too precise, too controlled, every detail accounted for, but nothing expanded beyond necessity. No context, no surrounding movement, no indication of what had led to the moment. It was a conclusion, not a story. Lena had accepted that once, because grief did not always allow room for investigation. But now, grief had changed. It had become something sharper, more focused. Suspicion. The hook formed in her mind with quiet force. The most dangerous lies are not the ones you're told. They're the truths you're never allowed to question. Lena began tracing the edges of the narrative, not directly, not openly, because she understood the world she was in. Information was not freely given. It was controlled, filtered, protected. So she adapted. She observed patterns in records, access points, movements of information. Nothing obvious, nothing careless. But even the most controlled systems had seams. And Lena, she found them. The first inconsistency was small, a timestamp that did not align with the reported sequence of events. Insignificant on its own, but enough. The second, a missing report, referenced once, never filed. The third, a name, appearing where it shouldn't, then disappearing completely. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed something else. A gap. And gaps did not exist in a system like Adrian Cross's, unless they were placed there intentionally. Lena's breathing slowed as the realization settled, because this was no longer about doubt. This was about design. Her brother's death had not been fully recorded. It had been controlled. That meant one thing. There was more. She moved deeper, carefully, deliberately, because now she was not just questioning the narrative. She was dismantling it. The more she uncovered, the less it aligned with what she had been told. Her brother had not been passive, not a victim caught in something beyond his control. He had been active, involved. Deeply, the details surfaced slowly, fragmented, but undeniable. Financial movements that did not belong to him, connections to operations outside their family's control, interactions with individuals who should have been enemies but weren't. Lena felt it in her chest. Not shock, something heavier. Disorientation. Because this was not the man she had lost. Or it was a version of him she had never known. The realization pressed harder with every piece of information she uncovered, because it forced her to confront something she had not prepared for. Her brother had not been innocent. That did not mean he deserved to die, but it meant his death was not what she had believed. Adrian's role shifted in her mind, not completely, not comfortably, but undeniably, from murderer to something else, something she could not define yet. And that was the problem, because definition gave clarity, and clarity gave direction. But now, there was none. Lena stepped back from the information, her mind racing through every possibility, every interpretation, every version of the truth she could construct. None of them aligned cleanly, because something was still missing. The why. Why had her brother been involved? Why had no one spoken about it? Why had everything been simplified into something easier to accept? And more importantly, who had made that decision? Her thoughts shifted, away from Adrian, toward something else. Her family. The realization came slowly, then all at once. They had controlled the narrative, not just after his death. Before it, the way they had responded, the way they had avoided detail, the way they had pushed her toward acceptance instead of understanding. It had not been grief. It had been containment. Lena's chest tightened as the truth settled deeper, because this changed everything. She had not just been misinformed. She had been manipulated. The anger returned, not sharp, not explosive, cold, focused, because betrayal cut differently when it came from the people who were supposed to protect you. Adrian had taken her brother's life, but her family, they had taken the truth. And that felt worse. Lena exhaled slowly, her posture steady despite the shift happening inside her, because now the conflict had changed. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about truth, and truth was far more dangerous. Adrian noticed, not her findings, not the details. The shift, the way her movements changed, more precise, more intentional. The way her attention focused on things that had previously gone ignored. The way she was no longer just existing in his world. She was analyzing it. His awareness sharpened, not intrusive, not confrontational, but present. He understood something was happening, even if he did not yet know what. And that narrowed the space she had to move. Lena felt it, the pressure, the awareness. But she did not stop, because stopping meant accepting the lie, and she no longer could. Her investigation deepened, not recklessly, carefully, and finally, she found it. Not a document, not a report. Evidence. Clear, undeniable. A connection that had been erased from every official record, but still existed in fragments. Her brother had not just been involved. He had been working against their own family. The realization hit with devastating clarity. Not loud, not chaotic. Final, because it answered everything. Why the narrative had been controlled. Why the truth had been hidden. Why Adrian had acted. It was not random. It was not unnecessary. It was consequence. Lena's hand tightened slightly, her breathing steady but her thoughts anything but, because this was the truth she had never been meant to find. And as it settled fully, reshaping everything she thought she understood about her brother, about her family, about Adrian, one final realization formed with quiet, irreversible weight. Her brother had not just died. He had betrayed everything before he did. The truth did not break Lena Carter. It divided her, cleanly, permanently, because once she saw it, once the evidence settled into something undeniable, there was no returning to the version of her life that had existed before. Her brother had not been innocent. Her family had not been honest. And Adrian Cross, he had not been the monster she needed him to be. That combination created something far more dangerous than grief. Clarity. And clarity changed everything. Lena did not confront anyone. Not Adrian. Not her family. Not even herself. Because confrontation required certainty. And what she had now was something deeper, more complicated. Understanding. The hook formed in her mind, sharp and irreversible. The most dangerous betrayal is not the one that destroys you. It's the one that forces you to see who your enemies really are. Lena stepped back from emotion, not because it disappeared, because it could no longer guide her. Anger toward Adrian remained, but it was no longer absolute. Grief for her brother remained, but it was no longer clean. And beneath both, something else had taken root. Suspicion, directed not outward, but inward. Her family. The realization did not come all at once. It unfolded, layer by layer. The forced marriage, the controlled narrative, the silence after her brother's death. None of it had been isolated. It had been coordinated. Lena began tracing the connections, not through direct access, through implication, through the way decisions aligned too perfectly. Her family had not just responded to her brother's actions. They had anticipated them, prepared for them. And when everything collapsed, they had already positioned her, not for protection, for leverage. The marriage was not about peace. It was about control. Over Adrian, over the situation, over the outcome that followed her brother's betrayal. And Lena, she had been placed at the center of it, not as a victim, as a tool. The realization settled coldly, without emotion, because emotion would only slow her down now. Her breathing steadied, her posture unchanged as her thoughts aligned into something sharper, more deliberate. If her family had orchestrated this, then they were not reacting to the war. They were shaping it. And that meant they were not just involved. They were responsible. The shift inside her completed in that moment. She was no longer standing between two sides. She was standing inside one. And that side was not the one she had believed in. Lena's actions changed immediately, not visibly, but fundamentally. She stopped searching for truth. She started controlling outcomes. Small changes, subtle adjustments. Information redirected, timing altered, movements influenced. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced, but enough to create space, enough to disrupt patterns, enough to prevent certain events from unfolding exactly as planned, and always without exposing herself, because she understood the risk. If her family realized she knew, she would not be protected. She would be removed. The realization did not frighten her. It focused her. Because now, she understood the game completely. And for the first time, she was playing it. Adrian noticed a shift. Of course he did. But not in the way others would. He did not confront her, did not question her, did not attempt to control the change. He observed. The way her movements became more precise. The way her attention aligned with moments that mattered. The way outcomes began to shift around her presence. And slowly, he understood something. She was no longer reacting to the truth. She was using it. That realization did not create distance. It created alignment. Not openly, not intentionally, but undeniably. Lena found herself protecting him. Not directly, not emotionally, strategically. A delayed report that would have exposed his position. A subtle shift in information that prevented an internal breach. A movement that redirected attention away from him and toward something else. Each action small, each action controlled, each action intentional. And every time she did it, the conflict inside her deepened. Because protecting him meant one thing. She had chosen a side, even if she had not admitted it yet. The emotional tension intensified, not between them, within her. Guilt for misjudging him, anger for being used, realization for understanding too late. They layered together, forming something heavier than anything she had felt before. Because this was no longer simple. There was no clear enemy, only truth, and truth did not choose sides. Lena moved through the structure carefully, her awareness heightened, her thoughts sharper than ever, because now she saw everything differently. The people she once trusted were no longer neutral. They were variables, and some of those variables were dangerous. The internal fractures within her family became visible, not openly, but through behavior. Certain individuals moved too carefully, watched too closely, spoke too little. They were not just part of the system. They were controlling it. Spies, not placed within Adrian's world, within her own. The realization solidified everything. Her family was not defending themselves. They were orchestrating. And Lena, she had been placed exactly where they needed her. But they had made one mistake. They assumed she would remain loyal. The power shift happened quietly. Lena was no longer reacting to their decisions. She was interfering with them, altering outcomes, disrupting timing, creating uncertainty where there had once been control. And that made her dangerous. The hook returned, sharper now. The moment you stop being controlled is the moment you become a threat. Lena understood the risk, completely, because she was no longer invisible. Her actions were too precise, too aligned, too intentional. Someone would notice, and when they did, there would be no negotiation, only removal. The realization came sooner than expected, not through confrontation, through awareness, the shift in attention, the weight of observation that did not belong to Adrian. Someone was watching her, not casually, not curiously, strategically. Lena felt it immediately, the way space changed, the way presence adjusted around her. And she knew the moment had arrived. Her family had realized something. Not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that she was no longer aligned with them. Enough to see her not as an asset, but as a risk. Lena's breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged as the truth settled into place. There would be no confrontation, no warning, no second chance. Because in their world, loyalty was not questioned. It was enforced, and disloyalty was eliminated. As the realization solidified, as the silent tension around her sharpened into something far more dangerous, one final truth became clear. She was no longer part of her family's plan. She was a flaw in it. And somewhere within the system she had just begun to dismantle. Someone had already decided how to fix that flaw. The war did not begin with gunfire. It began with a lie. By the time the first bullet was fired across the marble courtyard of the Varelli estate, the truth had already been buried beneath layers of manipulation, whispers, and carefully orchestrated betrayal. What followed was merely the visible fracture, the eruption of something far more dangerous than territorial ambition. This war was not about land. It was about control over reality itself. And everyone was already losing. The city shifted overnight. Safe zones dissolved into contested ground. Trusted allies grew silent. Surveillance tightened like a noose, and every message, every call, every movement carried the weight of suspicion. Inside the Varelli stronghold, the atmosphere had changed. Adrian no longer moved like a man in control of an empire. He moved like a man anticipating collapse. Yet he never showed fear, only precision. Every command he gave was deliberate, every decision calculated. Even as his inner circle fractured, 2 captains gone within 48 hours, one confirmed dead, the other missing. He never allowed the chaos to touch his expression, but Lena saw it, not in his face, in the pauses, in the way his hand lingered just a second too long over a file, in how he reread intelligence reports, not once, but 3 times. In the rare moments when he thought no one was watching, that was when the truth slipped through. He wasn't just fighting enemies. He was fighting something he couldn't name. The first assassination attempt came at dawn. A sniper positioned across the eastern tower had a clean shot. Too clean. It was meant to succeed. Adrian had stepped into the courtyard alone, unguarded, as if inviting death. Lena had been watching from the balcony above, unease already tightening in her chest. The moment stretched, then shattered. The shot rang out, and Adrian moved before it reached him. Not instinct, not luck, knowledge. He shifted just enough of the bullet to graze his shoulder instead of piercing his heart. Guards flooded the courtyard instantly, but the sniper was already gone, disappeared as if he had never existed. Lena's breath caught. That wasn't an attack. That was a message. And Adrian had expected it. "You knew," Lena said later, her voice cutting through the silence of his office. Adrian didn't look up immediately. He finished binding the wound himself, ignoring the blood staining his shirt. "I suspected." "That's not suspicion," she snapped. "You walked into it." Now he looked at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his gaze. Not anger, not frustration. Resignation. Some truths only reveal themselves when you let them try to kill you. The words settled heavily between them. Lena felt something shift. Not fear, understanding. The attacks didn't stop. They multiplied. Supply routes were sabotaged. Communications intercepted. Safe houses compromised before anyone could reach them. It wasn't random chaos. It was surgical dismantling. Someone knew everything. Every move. Every weakness. Every secret. And that meant one thing. There was a traitor. The realization spread like poison through the organization. Paranoia became protocol. No one trusted anyone. Men who had stood side by side for years now kept their hands near their weapons. Conversations ended abruptly when someone new entered the room. Even loyalty began to feel performative, like something that needed to be proven over and over again. Lena watched it unfold with growing clarity. This wasn't just war. This was psychological annihilation. And whoever was behind it understood one thing perfectly. You don't destroy an empire by force. You destroy it by turning it against itself. Adrian grew colder, more distant, but not from Lena, from everyone else. With her, something strange began to emerge. Not softness, trust, not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind revealed in silence. He didn't explain everything, but he didn't hide her anymore. She was present in strategy meetings, allowed access to restricted intel, given space in conversations that once would have excluded her entirely. It wasn't permission. It was recognition. And Lena didn't take it lightly. One night, buried deep within intercepted files, she found the fracture, a pattern, small inconsistencies across multiple reports, timing discrepancies, altered routes that didn't align with original orders. At first glance, they looked insignificant, but together, they told a story. Someone inside wasn't just leaking information. They were rewriting it, subtly, strategically, and most importantly, they were guiding Adrian toward failure. Lena didn't bring it to him immediately. Instead, she watched. She traced movements, tracked decisions, and slowly, a name began to surface. Not the obvious one, not the loudest voice in the room, but the quietest, the one no one questioned, the one always present, but never noticed. The realization hit her like ice, and with it came something worse. Guilt. She had been wrong about Adrian. From the beginning, she had seen him as the architect of her suffering, the man who controlled everything, the one who pulled every string. But now, she saw the truth. He wasn't controlling the chaos. He was trying to survive it. And somehow, he was still protecting her. The second assassination attempt made that undeniable. It happened in the underground garage. Dark, confined, no escape routes. Perfect. Lena had been walking alone, her mind still unraveling the threads of betrayal, when the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Too fast, too close. She turned and saw the gun. Everything slowed. There was no time to think, no time to react, only the certainty of what came next. Then, Adrian was there. He didn't shout, didn't hesitate. He moved like a force, stepping between her and the bullet before it could reach her. The shot fired. Impact. Silence. For a moment, the world stopped. Then it crashed back all at once. Guards stormed in. The attacker was taken down instantly. Chaos filled the space. But Lena heard none of it. All she saw was Adrian, standing, barely, blood spreading across his side. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached him. He looked at her, breath uneven but steady enough. And for the first time, he didn't deflect, didn't hide, didn't control the narrative. "I never wanted you as my enemy." The words shattered something inside her, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Everything she believed, everything she built her anger on, everything she used to survive, collapsed because the truth was simple and devastating. He had been protecting her all along, not owning her, not controlling her, protecting her, even when she hated him, even when she fought him, even when it cost him everything. That was the moment Lena changed. Not visibly, not instantly, but fundamentally. She stopped reacting and started thinking. The next time she entered the war room, she didn't sit in silence. She observed, calculated, connected the patterns no one else saw. And when she spoke, people listened. "They're not targeting operations," she said calmly, eyes scanning the room. "They're targeting decisions." Silence followed, confusion, then realization. "If they control what you believe is true," she continued, "they control what you do next." Adrian watched her closely, not surprised, not skeptical, just focused. "So we stop reacting to what we're told," she finished, "and start questioning why we're being told it." It was a first real shift, not in power, but in direction. From that moment on, Lena wasn't just part of the war. She was influencing it. She rerouted communications, created false intel trails, tested loyalty without revealing suspicion, and slowly, the chaos began to change shape, not disappear, but bend. Adrian didn't interfere, didn't question her methods, didn't ask how she saw what others couldn't. He simply let her, and in that silent permission, something deeper formed between them. Not romance, not yet, something quieter, stronger, dangerous in its own way. Understanding. They didn't need to say it, didn't need to define it, because in a world built on lies, finding someone who saw the truth the same way you did was more powerful than anything else. But war doesn't wait for clarity, and truth doesn't protect you. The final piece fell into place 3 nights later. Lena stood alone in the archive room, the weight of realization settling over her like a storm. Every pattern, every inconsistency, every calculated move pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't just betrayal. This was orchestration. And Adrian was the target, not just for elimination, but for something worse. Framing, the attacks, the leaks, the manipulated decisions. They were all leading to one inevitable outcome. A crime, one he didn't commit, but one that would destroy him completely. Legally, politically, irrevocably. Lena's breath slowed. Her mind sharpened. And for the first time, fear wasn't what drove her. It was resolve. Because now, she understood the war. It wasn't about who had more power. It was about who controlled the narrative. And if she didn't take control of it, someone else already had. Her hands tightened slightly as the final realization settled in. Not just what was happening, but how close it was. Too close. She turned, already moving, already planning, because there was no more time to hesitate. If she didn't act now, if she didn't outmaneuver the lie before it became truth, Adrian wouldn't just lose the war. He would be destroyed for a crime he didn't commit. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded, piece by piece, detail by detail, until there was no space left for denial. Lena had spent days trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. A version of the past, a version of her brother, a version of the man she believed Adrian had destroyed. But truth, when it finally surfaced, didn't ask for permission. It replaced everything. She stood alone in the private archive room, the last place she had expected to find answers, and the only place that still held them. No guards, no interruptions, just records, unedited, unfiltered, real. The screen in front of her glowed with cold clarity, displaying fragments of conversations, encrypted files now decrypted, timelines that had once been altered, now restored. And at the center of it all, her brother, not the version she remembered, not the one she had mourned, the real one. Her breathing slowed, not from calm, but from something heavier, understanding, because the pattern was undeniable. Deals made in silence, alliances formed in shadow, information sold, strategically, deliberately. And then, the final piece, the moment everything broke, a recording, time-stamped, locked, hidden deep enough that no one would find it unless they knew exactly where to look. Lena hesitated for only a second before pressing play. The image flickered to life. A dim room, two figures. One she recognized instantly. Her brother. The other, Adrian. But not the Adrian she knew now. This version of him was colder, more distant. Not because he didn't feel, but because he had already decided something irreversible. "You shouldn't have come here," Adrian said in the recording, his voice low, controlled. Her brother smiled slightly, not warmly, confidently. "I didn't come here to negotiate," he replied. Lena's chest tightened, because even now, even knowing what she had already seen, part of her still wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, a missing context, something that would make this easier. But there wasn't. "I gave you a chance," Adrian continued. A pause. "You were supposed to stay out of it." Her brother's expression didn't change. "I was never going to stay out of it," he said. And there it was, the confirmation. Not forced, not manipulated. Chosen. "You expose them," Adrian said, not accusing, stating. "And you think that makes you better than them?" Her brother's voice sharpened slightly. "It makes me necessary." Lena felt something inside her crack, because that wasn't the man she remembered. That wasn't the brother who protected her, who had taught her, who had stood between her and everything dangerous in the world. This was someone else. Someone who had made himself part of that danger. "You started something you can't control," Adrian said. Her brother didn't deny it. "I don't need to control it," he replied. "I just need to survive it." The words echoed in Lena's mind long after they were spoken, because survival, in their world, always came at a cost. And now she was starting to understand what that cost had been. The recording shifted slightly. Tension rising. Decisions forming. "This ends now," Adrian said. And for the first time, there was something in his voice that wasn't just control. It was resolve. Final. Her brother exhaled slowly. "You won't do it," he said. Not fear, certainty. Because he believed something. Something that Lena had believed too. That Adrian Cross was incapable of crossing that line without reason, without purpose, without necessity. And for a brief second, Lena saw it. The moment everything changed. Not in action, in understanding. Because Adrian wasn't looking at her brother like an enemy. He was looking at him like a problem that had no other solution left. "I already have," Adrian said quietly. The recording ended. Abrupt, final. And the silence that followed was unbearable. Lena didn't move, didn't breathe, because everything she had built her anger on, everything she had held on to make sense of the past, was gone, replaced by something far more complicated, far more painful. Truth. Her knees weakened slightly, but she didn't fall. She couldn't, not yet, because the truth didn't just change what happened. It changed what it meant. Adrian hadn't killed her brother out of cruelty. He hadn't done it to gain power. He hadn't done it without reason. He had done it because there was no other way to stop what her brother had started. The realization hit harder than anything else, because it didn't just take away her anger. It took away her certainty. And without that, she didn't know who she was supposed to be anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped back from the screen. Grief surfaced then. Not the kind she had felt before. Not the clean, simple pain of loss. This was different. Messier, because it wasn't just about losing her brother. It was about losing the version of him she had loved. The version that had never truly existed. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not fully, because something else was rising alongside the grief. Guilt, sharp, relentless, because she had blamed Adrian, hated him, built her entire understanding of him around something that wasn't true, and he had never corrected her, never defended himself, never exposed the truth to clear his name, because doing so would have destroyed her. That realization broke something deeper, because it meant one thing. He had chosen her, even when she was against him, even when she hated him, even when it cost him everything. The emotional hook settled into her chest like a weight she couldn't escape. The man she had every reason to destroy was the only one who had protected her from a truth she wasn't ready to survive. Her breath hitched slightly as the weight of that realization settled fully. because now there was no one left to blame, no one left to hate, only a choice, and it was a choice she couldn't avoid anymore. Outside, the situation had already begun to collapse. Reports were coming in faster than they could be processed, movements across territories, alliances breaking, forces repositioning, and at the center of it, Adrian. They were closing in on him, not because he was weak, but because they believed he was vulnerable, because of her, because of what she represented, because of what they thought they knew. And if the truth didn't come out, if the narrative didn't change, he would fall, not through defeat, through misdirection, through a lie that had been allowed to exist for too long. Lena's mind moved quickly now, faster than before, not clouded by emotion, focused by it, because the choice in front of her was clear. She could let it happen. Let Adrian carry the weight of something he hadn't done out of cruelty. Let him fall for a version of the truth that wasn't complete. And in doing so, avenge her brother. Or she could expose everything, reveal the truth, destroy the narrative that had been built for years, and save the man who had never once defended himself. The cost of that choice was immediate, obvious, irreversible, because exposing the truth wouldn't just protect Adrian. It would destroy what was left of her brother's legacy, erase the last version of him that still existed in the world, the last piece of something she had loved. Her chest tightened painfully, because this wasn't strategy. This was loss, all over again, but deeper this time, because now she had to choose it. Footsteps approached from behind, breaking through her thoughts. Fast, urgent, a guard. "They've breached the outer perimeter," he said. Lena turned sharply. "How long?" "Minutes." That was all she needed. No more time to think. No more time to hesitate. The decision had to be made now. She closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, to settle it, because there was no version of this where she didn't lose something. But there was a version where she chose who she became after. Her eyes opened, clear, certain. "Where is he?" she asked. The guard hesitated. Then, main hall. Of course he was. At the center, holding everything together, even as it started to collapse. Lena moved without another word. Fast, purposeful, because the choice had already been made. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. The corridors blurred as she moved through them, the tension in the air thick, suffocating. People were repositioning, preparing, reacting. But Lena, she wasn't reacting anymore. She was stepping into control. Because this wasn't just about survival now. It was about truth. And truth needed to be seen, heard, understood, before it was too late. She reached the main hall just as the first signs of conflict began to surface. Voices raised, weapons drawn, lines forming. Adrian stood at the center of it all, unmoving, unshaken, as if he had already accepted the outcome. Whatever it was. Lena stopped for only a second, long enough to see him clearly, long enough to understand what he was about to do. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to explain. He was going to take it. All of it. The blame, the consequences, the end, without ever telling them the truth. Something inside her snapped into place. Because that was no longer an option. Not anymore. Not when she knew. Not when she understood. Not when the truth was hers to carry now. She stepped forward, directly into the center of the conflict. And everything stopped, not because they expected her, but because of where she stood. Between them, between sides, between truth and destruction. Adrian's gaze snapped to hers instantly. Sharp, warning. "Lena!" But she didn't let him finish. "Stop." The word cut clean through the tension. Not loud, but absolute. Because this time, she wasn't standing behind him. She wasn't being protected. She was taking control. And the moment she did, the entire dynamic shifted. Because Lena had made her choice. Not for revenge, not for blood, but for truth, even if it meant destroying everything she had left. Her voice steadied as she prepared to speak, to expose it all, to change everything. And as the enemies closed in tighter, as the pressure built, as the consequences became unavoidable, Lena stepped forward into the line of danger, without hesitation, choosing Adrian over her own bloodline. The confrontation didn't feel like war. Not anymore. War had noise. This had silence. A silence built from decisions already made, from truths that could no longer be buried, and power that could no longer be controlled the old way. Lena stood at the center of it, not hidden, not guarded, seen. The hall was vast, flooded with natural daylight pouring through high glass panels, illuminating every face, every reaction, every unspoken calculation. No shadows to hide in, no darkness to manipulate, only truth. And truth was far more dangerous than any weapon they had ever used. Adrian stood beside her, not ahead, not shielding her. Beside her. That alone sent a ripple through the room. Because men like Adrian Cross did not share power. They held it, controlled it, defined it. Until now, across from them stood the families. Not united, not divided. Something in between, fractured by doubt, tension, and the quiet understanding that whatever happened next would change everything. Lena didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward. And the moment she did, every conversation stopped. Not because she demanded silence, but because she had become something that didn't need to ask for it. "You've all been asking the wrong question," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear, steady, unshaken. "You've been asking who controls the power." A pause. Her gaze moved across them. Measured, intentional. But that's not the question that matters anymore. There was movement among them, subtle shifts, exchanged glances, calculations breaking, reforming, because they felt it. The shift. "The real question," Lena continued, "is who controls the truth behind it." That landed, harder than any threat ever could, because power could be taken, stolen, destroyed, but truth, once exposed, could not be undone. A man stepped forward from the opposing side, older, sharper, someone who had built his reputation on control and silence. "And you believe that truth is yours?" he asked. It wasn't challenge. It was a test. Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "I don't believe anything," she said. "I know." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't stable. It was cracking. "You tried to erase me," she continued. "Not just my name. My history. My existence." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because of what I was connected to, because of what I represented. A beat. "And because you were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out." The room tightened, not physically, but psychologically, because fear in their world was never acknowledged, only hidden, controlled, weaponized. Until now, Adrian didn't move, didn't interrupt, but his presence shifted slightly, closer, steadier, not to take over, to support, because this moment was hers. Lena exhaled slowly, grounding herself. And then she stepped fully into it. "You didn't fail because I survived," she said. "You failed because the truth survived with me." That was the fracture point. You could see it, feel it, the exact second where control slipped from their hands. And something else took its place. Understanding. Dangerous. Irreversible understanding. "Everything you built," she continued, her voice sharper now, more defined, "relies on controlled narratives, on secrets, on selective truth." Her gaze hardened. "I just removed that control." No one spoke, because there was nothing left to deny. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't negotiable. It was standing in front of them, alive, uncontrolled, and aligned with the one man they had all tried to break. Adrian. He stepped forward then, not as a ruler, not as a threat, but as something far more unsettling. A man who no longer needed to pretend control. "We don't rebuild this with fear," he said. His voice was calm, measured, but absolute. "We rebuild it with truth." That statement alone rewrote the entire system, because fear created obedience, but truth created stability, and stability was something none of them had ever truly had. Not like this, not real, not lasting. The man across from them studied Adrian carefully. "You're asking us to trust you," he said. Adrian shook his head, slightly. "No." A pause. I'm asking you to accept reality. That hit differently, because trust could be refused. Negotiated. Reality could not. The shift happened quietly after that, not through agreement, not through declarations, but through acceptance. Small at first, then growing, because no one in that room could deny what had just happened. Power had changed, not transferred, not stolen, redefined, and at the center of that change was Lena. She felt it, not as pressure, not as fear, but as clarity. For the first time since this began, she wasn't reacting. She wasn't surviving. She was choosing. The room slowly began to settle, not into peace, but into something more controlled, more balanced. Lines were redrawn, not visibly, but fundamentally. And with each passing moment, the war that had once seemed inevitable dissolved, not completely, but enough to end what it had been and begin something else, something new, something far more dangerous in its own way. Lena stepped back slightly, not retreating, repositioning, because her role had changed, irreversibly. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't leverage. She wasn't something to be protected or controlled. She was a force within the system itself. Equal. Adrian turned toward her then, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his expression, no guarded distance, only something real. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Lena met his gaze. Yes, I did. A pause. Because this doesn't end unless someone changes the rules. Adrian studied her for a moment, then a small, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. Not surprise, not disbelief, recognition, because he understood now, fully, completely, she wasn't someone he had to protect anymore. She was someone who could stand with him, and that realization changed something deeper than power ever could. You hate me less now, he said, his voice quieter than before. Not a question, an observation. Lena held his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look conflicted. She looked certain. I never hated you the way I thought I did, she said. The honesty in her voice was sharp, clean, because it had taken everything. Pain, confusion, anger, truth, to get here. A beat passed between them. Heavy, meaningful. You were the only one who never lied to me, she added. And that was the hook. The realization that changed everything. Because in a world built on deception, truth wasn't soft. It wasn't kind. It was brutal, unforgiving. But it was real, and Adrian had given her that, even when it cost him control, even when it made him the villain in her story. Lena exhaled slowly, the weight of everything settling, not as a burden, but as something she had finally accepted. This was never about the marriage, she said. Adrian didn't respond immediately, because he already knew where this was going. It was about what came after, she continued. A pause. Choice. That word shifted the air between them, because the marriage, the bond that had once been forced, strategic, transactional, was no longer any of those things. Not now. Now, it was something else entirely. Something chosen. Adrian stepped closer, not imposing, not controlling, deliberate. If you walk away now, he said quietly, no one will stop you. The offer was real. No hidden conditions. No manipulation. Just truth. Lena looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as the man who had taken her into this world. Not as the one who had controlled it. But as the one who had stood beside her when it mattered. The one who hadn't lied. The one who had changed. Not by losing power, but by redefining it. She didn't hesitate. I'm not walking away. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Because this time, it wasn't forced. It wasn't expected. It was chosen. And that made it stronger than anything they had before. Adrian didn't smile. He wasn't that kind of man. But something in him shifted. Subtly, permanently. Because for the first time, he hadn't just gained control. He had gained something far more rare. An equal. The room had nearly emptied by then. The war, at least in its current form, was over. Not erased, not forgotten, but ended. And in its place, a new structure had begun to form. built not on fear, but on truth. Lena stood still for a moment, letting it all settle. The grief, the loss, the transformation. Because even victories like this came with cost. But for the first time, that cost felt worth it. She turned slightly, her gaze moving toward the open space ahead. The future, unclear, unpredictable, but hers to shape. And as she took a step forward, something inside her stilled. Not instinct, not fear, something else. Awareness. Because power didn't disappear. It shifted, expanded, attracted. Her expression changed, just slightly, because deep down, she understood something that no one else in that room had fully realized yet. The truth she had revealed hadn't just ended a war. It had created a new kind of power. And power like that never stayed unchallenged. Somewhere beyond what she could see, someone was already watching, already calculating, already preparing. And this time, they weren't coming for control. They were coming for her.